have you on.
Yeah, no, looking forward to it. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely. First off, I want to say this year for 2025 for you, just not in here in TCR in America, but globally has been a fantastic year, I would say so far.
Yeah, it's been a good year so far, definitely. These last few years, I'm super grateful. It's been a few really good seasons so far.
And I think, looking at it, Hyundai is one of the best brands to race one of those TCR cars. You got it, definitely the numbers game helped though, but the way Hyundai's evolved that car over the years. I remember when they first came in, and there was some hurdles to get over, but Hyundai has really become one of the top brands of the TCR world.
Definitely. Yeah, they have really developed that chassis and you can feel it in the road car too, which is super cool. The street and the track car are a couple of really, really fun cars to drive.
We want to start off here though. Mason, what got you into racing? What was your initial starting point to getting into racing?
Yeah, so I actually started in motocross and I started riding a dirt bike when I was 4 years old. And my dad put me on there, much to my mom's dismay. And then after that, I moved into karting when I was about 12, 13 years old. And I did about a year and a half of karting, which is pretty short for compared to nowadays. A lot of these kids are karting very, very young. Afterwards, I jumped into a Spec Miata where I ran Spec Miata for a few years and I won the Team Mazda Challenge Championship. And after that, I moved into the MX5 Cup and I did about three races in that, 3 weekends. And then I did the rest of the season in what is now TC America, but that was called World Challenge back in the day. And that was a great learning spot. I ran World Challenge in the lower, what would be now TCA class, and then I moved up into the TC class with a M235i. And the season I was running was really, really cool because I think we had a field of 38 plus cars. So the track action was packed and qualifying was super tight. And I was able to learn a lot in those lower pro racing scenes to be able to make it into other opportunities, which was super cool.
Yeah, you say you started out motocross. A lot of drivers talked to it was all karting. Was there anything you could take from what you learned in motocross to racing cars now? Is there any similarities?
I think that something that taught me, which was really interesting, was weight transfer.
Mhm.
And, there's a lot to learn on the four wheels, but that basic understanding of when the front dives or, I mean, I drive front wheel drive car now, but, putting the power down, those kinds of things I think are very helpful in understanding the dynamics and having that feeling with your body. I think is really important, right? Being in tune with what you're feeling and being able to translate that to the track and to the wheel. I think that might have been helpful. I can't say exactly, I was pretty young back then, so but I know when I jumped into a cart for the first time, that there was really no fear factor in that. And I think it was just because I had so much motocross experience, jump in and you can kind of get up the pace pretty quickly.
Yeah, you have to have zero fear in that sport. Looking at what they're able to do, like the pros, and that it's really awesome that they do that. That's cool that you were able to go from motocross to cars, well, karting to cars. And I was a karter. That's what I started out in, and road courses were something that I always found as a natural because it was one of those. It's a rhythm sport. Road course, you gotta be able to stay in a good rhythm. Know where in your brake markers and make sure you're hitting the apexes and stuff. But that's something I've never heard of. Driver going from most of them that go from motocross go straight into stay in that or even into road racing on the bikes. But that's really neat. And I see where you mean the weight transfer, especially in a front drive car. You see that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, just maybe it wasn't the weight transfer, maybe it was just like the body feeling of being young and being in tune with the feeling of a vehicle, right? I think that all that transfers, right? Seat time and anything.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
nowadays you see people jumping out of the sim into cars and just having like that mind body connection, I think is super helpful.
Speaking of the sim, did that we about I guess it's been 2 weeks ago now. We saw you take part in your third Nurburgring 24 hours. Was that a big help in getting you prepared for something like that magnitude, or is seat time really what helps at a track like Nurburgring?
Yeah, I think that the sim is really helpful for learning the corners.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot of benefit to that. But when it comes to the Nürburgring, a track that's so complex, and even after 3 years of going there, I am still learning the bumps and the different turn-ins and different things that are just so unique to that place. And we look at the qualifiers earlier this year, it was pouring rain. I mean, the most rain that I've ever experienced in my racing career. And here in the States, we typically red flag when it gets that intense, and they just ran it. And I'll have to shoot you some photos afterwards, but
Oh
it
yeah.
was pretty crazy. And I was like, man, this is awesome because I get to take all of this experience and kind of place it in different areas of racing. And I think that it's just one of those places where seat time is so important, but the sim is also so helpful to get your brain in the right spot to be able to approach that track.
Talking about the weather, we look at last year. Um, I think we got what 6 or 7 hours of the race into the 24 because the weather was so intense. In a track that big here in America, it's pretty easy to gauge when you need to go on to rain tires from slicks. But a track that big, what's kind of the point that y'all know that okay, we need to maybe make the change to a wet weather tire because it's that track it can be bone dry on the first sector, but you move into sector 2 and 3 and it can be just totally wet. How does that? How do y'all kind of gauge that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a huge piece of that is depending on where it's wet.
Mhm.
There's certain sections that you can survive on the slick tires, but there's some that you just really cannot. And I think that it all depends on how much time you'll lose, as well as what does the rain tire wear look like. There's a lot of instances where it's damp out there, and you're hopefully sticking to the dry line. And luckily, there's over 100 cars on track. For example, there's 140 cars on track at the last race. So typically a dry line does develop pretty quickly if the rain stops, but it's really interesting you ask that because I still don't know to this day. I think engineers even have a hard time making that choice. We saw at Silverstone F1 last weekend where they're throwing at it, different strategies, and it's the kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, do we jump on intermediates? Do we jump on to rains? Do we put soft tires on the front and cut slicks on the rear? It's like, what are these different changes that you make to give you the best possible outcome around that place? And it's really just about surviving, especially the 24-hour.
Absolutely. And did y'all run Michelin's at Nurburgring? Because I know there was a big kind of tire. Some teams ran different tires and stuff. So was Michelin the primary one for y'all at Nurburgring?
At Nürburgring, we actually ran Goodyear's, which is
Okay.
the TCR Europe specified tire. And so those were really, really good there. And something that's cool about the Nürburgring is most of the classes have an open tire. So if you watch the top class GT3, it's called SP9, they can run whatever tire they want. So there's a lot of tire manufacturers there that are competing in within themselves to have the best tire for the best car for, you see everything from Falcon to Pirelli to Michelin's being ran, even Hankook. And I think that, there's a few others out there that were, fighting with each other, and I think it's really cool to kind of see that race almost thrown back to old school IMSA or what I forget the name of what it was called, but it's pretty awesome.
Was there did the do the tires obviously Goodyear and Michelin, two different brands. Are you able to drive them differently, or did they feel kind of the same to you compared between the two tires?
Yeah, I think both of them have their own characteristics to
Mhm.
it. Something about the Nürburgring is that it's really unique, and the pavement itself is very unique. So it's not really comparing apples to apples, but I find that their differences are minimal, but I think it comes when you're at that maximum attack spot. And we run different compounds over in Nürburgring. We have hards and softs, and so we're able to kind of change that depending on what the weather looks like. And this previous race was really, really hot, so it was one of those places where or one of those races where you had to always kind of stick on the hard and you had to be careful of tire wear. And it's a track that normally doesn't get that hot, so you don't have to worry about that. Typically you're racing there and it's high as 60 degrees, Fahrenheit, and this time it was over 80 degrees. So it was a different kind of animal in itself.
Yeah, that was something I noticed. That was a big talking point this year, just the heat. And that track, it doesn't seem like it eats away at the tires so much. Did you kind of notice that the first time you made the trip to Germany?
And the first time we made it over there, we didn't we had one of those really cold weekends
Mhm.
and one of those intermediate weekends that we are talking about where it was slicks and rains and slicks and rains and hot and cold. And so I didn't really notice that too much. But for the very first 24 hour, which was 2023 that I ran there, we did have some, some tire, not, I wouldn't say issues, but you could definitely feel the wear, halfway, three-quarter of the way through the stint, you're definitely feeling it. So it was something that you would have to kind of adjust your driving style to make sure you could have that reliability and you wouldn't have a tire failure, which is super common at that
Oh
track when
yeah.
it does get hot.
For you, when you first made it over there, what was it like the first time getting in that track at night? Because night running is so different to day running. Was it? I know that had to be something like you've never done before, raced at that magnitude of a track.
Yeah, I mean, I did Daytona 24 once and it's kind of light there, And when you go to the Nürburgring, I remember my first night lap, I was like, wow, it is dark. It's one of those places where you're ripping through the forest and I don't exactly know how to describe it, but if you think about you're on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere and there's not a single street light around, that's what it's like ripping through there. And you're doing, north of 150 miles an hour in some sections. And so I remember my first night lap. I think I only had one practice night lap the first time. And we jumped into the race and I did the night stint on the qualifiers. And for me, I jumped into a drying track, which the driver before me had reins. I jumped in on slicks and we had to go chase down our competition. And so it was one of those things where I was like, man, thankfully I could see the dry line with the lights, but man, I do not want to put a wheel wrong. It was a pretty treacherous first time in the night.
You bring up a point, Daytona 24, when you ran it with a JDC in 23. How would you compare that race to some of the other races that you've done, like maybe Daytona 24? I know it's probably hard to two of the biggest races in the world, though, but how can you kind of compare those some of those races together to Nürburgring?
Yeah, I think that all 24s are really special. I think it's something where, you have to have a well-oiled machine when you're talking the team, the engineer, your drivers. And Daytona was my first 24 that I did in the pro stuff. I did some 25 hours at Thunder Hill before
Oh
that.
yeah.
But Daytona was an animal, right? Jumping in, did my first time driving a prototype and something with that much downforce. So that was pretty difficult. And then when we went to the Nürburgring, later that year, it was a whole nother task just because I think the track is so treacherous. The nighttime's very different and you drive a lot. It was one of our teammates didn't run at all at night, so three of us took over and it was one of those times where I don't think I've been so tired except for after that race. So
What
it
was
was
the
a good time.
what was the minimum drive time at for Nürburgring since you've been doing it?
I believe the minimum drive time total is 2 hours.
2 hours?
And then, yeah, it's about 2 hours, which is a certain amount of laps, I think is how they classify it. I'm not exactly sure, but
Yeah.
that's about what it comes out to. If there's a red flag, that changes. If the red flag's over 2 hour long, then I believe it's only one lap for minimum drive time. So typically, if you have someone that's not too comfortable in your pro team, you might be able to use that to your advantage. Luckily, we had really good drivers with
Oh
us,
yeah.
and everyone was up to speed, and so it was quite a good time.
I heard someone compare Nürburgring to Porsche did a documentary a few years ago about them doing both Le Mans Nürburgring back to back weeks. I think it was 2019 or 20 was when it came out, and they compared Le Mans like going to Hollywood. It's all the pomp and circumstance. You got all the hypercars and other prototypes, all factory teams, and when you get to Nürburgring, it's like going to your home track, your home local track that some of the drivers there outside of Nürburgring, most people probably never heard of, but they're probably just as good as some of the pros. Would you say that that was a fair assessment of Nürburgring?
Yeah, I think that that's a super fair assessment of Nürburgring, and I think that that's something that's so raw about that place. You have these top factory teams. We're talking Manti, we're talking, Mercedes, BMW, all these Ford, everyone's entering in a factory car or two. And then you're going all the way down to the guy that's running his car out of the garage with his buddies. And I think it makes that place so special. And I think it is so cool to have that type of energy at the track. And it just really brings you to a place of what motorsport is all about, right? It's the passion that we all love so much and adore. And I think that's one thing I always tell people why Nürburgring is my favorite place in the world. If I could have gotten married there, I would have. Like it is an awesome place. And it's the energy that is brought there at the track. I mean, it is one of those places where everyone is just so in love with racing and they'll do anything to do it. And you have everyone from the top to the bottom to the in between that are all there for the same reason. That's to win whatever class that they're in. It's really cool.
I think that's one of the big. I think people give Daytona and Le Mans a lot more credit as the bigger races, though. But I think Nurburgring is just as big. And as someone like me, that's I corner marshal a lot of the IMSA races and other pro events. I think that's probably top of the list of ones that I would love to get the opportunity to do. I know that that would be such a, as a blue flag or an undertaking because the speed differences between, oh goodness, I don't know how many classes of cars though, but I think that would just be one of the funnest races to get to do that as.
I really hope you get the opportunity to
Oh,
do
I
that
would.
because it is really cool and I appreciate the marshals so much there. I mean, they're like our lifeline. And it is an epic place to be and experience. And like you said, it is a huge event. I think they sold 280,000 tickets last race, and that is not even including the people that didn't get tickets or kids or whatever that were in the campsites, I believe. So the amount of energy and fans that are there for that event is something that I've never seen anywhere else.
I bet the first time you got there going through the famous carousel and fluke flight section had to be kind of like a pinch me moment because I'm sure that's a section of track everyone wants that dreams of getting to go through that one section.
Definitely. I mean, it is a fun section of track. And for me, after you get out of the carousel and you make it up the hill and down through Whipperman and all the way down to through like Flansgarden too, it is just such a flow and such a rhythm. It's really special.
Hyundai this year that y'all have, Brian Hurt Autosport has organized the last few years. One, I think some of the best lineup of drivers, not only with you and Harry Godsacker, but y'all got Mark Wilkins, Bryson Morris. He's just phenomenally fast this year. Y'all have had Robert Wickens the last couple of years. How would you assess the amount of talent that y'all have been able to bring the last few years, not only to Michelin Pilot but Nurburgring?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And our team owners, Brian and Sean, they have really been able to put together such a program where everyone is working towards one common goal, and that's to win. And so when you look at some of the lineups and that inner team competition, all we do is make each other better, right? We're fighting for hundredths sometimes against each other for pole, and it's one of those things that every time someone goes a little bit faster, you're like, I want to go a little bit faster. They always talk about those inner teammate rivalries in F1, but at the same time, they're some of your best friends at the track. And so it's been really cool to be in an environment that's so encouraging, but also so pressureful to perform. And I think that just comes down from the top.
Looking at it from this standpoint, unfortunately, y'all had to miss Watkins because y'all were at Nurburgring. How does that you think is going to hurt the season? But also benefit because obviously y'all have had a lot of success though. But what's maybe the downside of having to miss one event?
Yeah, I think when you look at driver championship, it's something that you always look at from driver perspective and missing one race. But from a car perspective, Harry and Parker, they did a great job in the 98. And so now we're leading the championship. And we'll just have to make sure that we're stay consistent for the rest of the year and fight for as many wins as possible. We have 2 wins so far this year, and we have like 2 other podiums as well. And so I think as long as we keep pushing forward and our engineer Megan, she's on it, our crew guys, they're on it. And so looking forward to getting back this weekend at Mosport.
Like I said, heading into most sport, what's the how do you feel about heading into a very rhythm track that you, in a lot of ways, I think you could compare to maybe Nürburgring to elevation change?
Yeah, I always compare it to like the mini Nürburgring. And it's one of those places that's narrow, fast, lots of elevation, and that's why I enjoy it so much. It's probably my second favorite track on the IMSA calendar next to Road Atlanta. And I'm really looking forward to getting there and hopefully, we'll go for a good result. So we'll see how it goes and I just love driving our Hyundai Elantra TCR machine around there.
I noticed this year and last year when I started marshaling a lot of y'all's events, especially it was real prevalent last year at Atlanta that that race last year didn't have a lot of cautions, and it in some instances at Atlanta it looked like the TCR cars were faster than the GS cars in certain sections of the track. How do you kind of go about trying to make passes on those cars when in instances you are faster than them? Because obviously they can get you
Yeah.
back on the straightaways.
Yeah, definitely. And we are down a power level and add some weight due to the IMSA regulations in order, to kind of help separate the classes a little bit. But when it comes to those really high downforce sections, like we have at Mosport, Road Atlanta, some at VIR and a couple of the other places, it's a really interesting dynamic that you have to add to the race. When we look at restarts, typically we're restarting with the kind of the guys in the back of GS and we have the class split. And so it's a strategy that you have to play into how you're going to manage that. And I think I was just thinking about this the other day, if we were to restart in front of the whole pack, it's something you wouldn't have to think about, right? You would do like a normal restart, normal race and you would head out, but it's like how do I put this car in between me and the competition, or what's the best way for me to get around this out of class car cleanly? And I think it's something special about multi-class racing that IMSA has, right? Where they add this new dynamic to it. And it could go from a moving chicane to someone you're battling with super hard because they're fighting for position, you're fighting for position. And so managing that traffic is really important, like you said.
And that was something, and I think that can be real prevalent coming into this weekend. But like to end it with this question here. You've been with Hyundai for a good section of your career and really built a big name with Hyundai. Do you see yourself staying with Hyundai, or if the opportunity were to present itself, would you maybe make the move eventually to maybe GT3 or GT4, or maybe even up to prototypes? Obviously, you've had a start in prototypes with JDC at the Rolex, but would you want to try some more of that stuff, or do you think I really like the TCR series?
Yeah, I think as a driver, we all want to go win all those races. We're
Right.
talking Daytona, Sebring, Road Atlanta, Le Mans,
Mhm.
Nürburgring, and SP9. And so, as a driver, you want to strive for the top. And when I look at my career so far, I'm just so grateful what Hyundai has done for me and who they are as a brand. And so, it's a fine balance. And I think that, looking at different opportunities, if they present themselves, of course, as a driver, you would love to go to that next level. And at the same time, you'd love to stay with Hyundai. So it's a very tricky question. And, I'm not sure how exactly I'm going to answer that right here, but it's always looking as a driver, like what is best for your career. And luckily, I have a lot of really cool people around me that could help me answer those questions.
Absolutely. And, Hyundai's also global. You got the global TCR championship. So that's also a possibility too. But I think the main thing is getting trophies like what I see in the background right there. I see one of the Nürburgring trophies right there. There we go. In Indy. Look at that right there. That's the
Yeah,
lifeblood of Hyundai, I think. It doesn't matter if you look at their IMSA program or World TCR or even their rally program, that winning those races is what's made Hyundai so successful. And I think with their Genesis, their sister program to Genesis is really going to help, I think, bring Hyundai and Genesis more globally than you've ever seen them before.
definitely. And they're making moves and they're for enthusiasts. They've been a great since the N brand was developed and even before that in motorsport. And so it's really cool to see where they've grown and I can't wait to see where they go.
Absolutely. And Mason, we want to thank you for coming on, and we wish you the best of luck this weekend at Mosport. We know it's going to be a fun race and a fun track.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys having me
Absolutely.
on and I can't
Yeah,
wait.
yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have you back on. We'll be at Road Atlantis this year, so we'll make sure to come by and check out, see how it's going, and hopefully see you again there win at Road Atlanta.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Thanks,
Talk to you
Mason.
soon.
Thank you.